Understanding these 10 insights for beginners learning to draw can really fast track our drawing progress, our improvement. However you want to draw and whatever you want to draw with, these insights apply. And they're not technique tips. They're actually far more important than that because these things are far more impacting, they're far more fundamental, far more foundational than ways of drawing a line or holding a pen. Perhaps you know some of them, but every one of these can make a big difference to your learning speed right now, and I've presented them in their logical progression. The first insight is to understand that learning to draw is a skill that we have to learn. Drawing is a skill to learn. We're not releasing or exploring our natural talent. Forget about what anyone has said to you about having artistic talent or whether you've thought this about yourself. If talent means anything at all, it's not relevant to learning a skill and may actually encourage bad habits that can hold us back because it can distract us from feeling that we need to do the work that's required to learn a skill. Rather, if you've ever learned a skill, if you've learned a foreign language or perhaps a sport, a musical instrument, or if you've just studied something at school or uni, then you've got experience in what learning a skill is about. And learning to draw requires no less than learning any other skill. And many, if not most of the principles of learning a skill well will apply to learning to draw well. The sorts of processes and effort that you've applied in these things will give you a good indication of what lies ahead. So, if we think of drawing as being a skill to learn, on day one of our learning this skill, we don't all start at the same place. Perhaps a good example is two kids at school on the first day of learning cross-country running. Now, if one of them happens to live a very long distance away from the school and they walk to and from the school and there are some very steep hills to climb up and go down, on day one of their learning to do cross-country, they're going to be in a better position than another kid who lives next door to the school. It's not that one has worked harder to be better on day one, but simply their life has equipped them better than the kid who hasn't had that advantage as part of their everyday life. It's the same with any skill we learn. And because of this, we shouldn't compare ourselves with anyone else with what they're up to. We each start where we start. So let's start from there and make choices that will take us to where we want to end up as effectively and efficiently as possible. The biggest problem with this third insight is that most people think it's not a problem. Most people would think that this really isn't a big deal for them, that this is not something they need to worry about. But it's that observation is a far more demanding skill, being able to see something clearly, far more demanding for drawing than for most things. And yet most of us think, I can see clearly, I can see well, I've managed to see things up till now. That's not going to be a problem. But the truth is what we need to see to draw well when we're using a reference or something in front of us, our starting point to be able to see the things we need to see to draw it well, we need to see things in a way that we haven't had to train ourselves to do. We're not just looking to recognize objects, and we're not just looking at shape, but we're trying to see form and we're trying to see the relative position of parts of something to other parts of that same thing or to other things. There's a lot more information we need to gather before we have what we need to have to put the pen on the paper. We can't draw well what we haven't seen clearly. A quick way of testing how good our observation is to get a photo, put it upside down and draw it upside down, not turning anything up the right way until we're finished. If our drawing looks better than we expect it to look, that's an indication that the observation we do when we normally draw isn't as strong as we think it is. The difference is how much we could improve immediately if when we drew the right way up, we observed as carefully as when we observe drawing upside down. If I haven't seen what I need to see to put the marks or the lines on the paper, then I'm just guessing. And that is probably the cause of many of my drawing issues, not any lack of technique. One of the largest mistakes that we can make when we learn to draw is thinking that when I sit down with a sheet of paper and whatever I draw with, I'm going to produce an artwork at the end. When instead, if I'm learning to draw, then as in the case with learning anything, I'm sitting down to a practice session, to a learning session. Think of daily piano practice. Think of weekly footy training. And the problem with trying to produce an artwork every time we sit down to draw, that mindset is going to interfere with the actual process of learning to draw. Because if I'm going to want to have an artwork at the end, then I'm probably going to be focused on not making any mistakes. Rather than trying to learn and to develop a way of understanding the drawing process, learning is a time for experimenting, for taking risks. Coming to understand new possibilities and playing around with those new possibilities. Being aware that I'm learning will set me up to take advantage of every minute I spend drawing. This next insight may really revolutionize things for some of you. And that's that mistakes are not something to be feared. They're not somehow an indictment or a condemnation or a proclamation of failure. Mistakes are a normal part of learning a skill. Imagine if you were learning piano, if every time you hit a wrong note you thought, oh, I'm wasting my time, I might as well give up. Or if you hit a wrong note when you're singing. Or if you air kick when you're learning to play football. No, when we learn skills, we expect to make mistakes and we practice so that we make fewer and fewer. But we have to take risks if we're going to learn to do the thing that will give the benefit when we do get it under control. To find the potential in any skill area always requires courage and pushing through things that aren't right. But the important thing is that when we make a mistake, we now have guidance as to what we need to do to not make it in the future. Every time we make a mistake, it's like a torch showing us how to do it better, more successfully, the way we want to do it in the future. We need to embrace mistakes, and by mistake I just mean any line or mark that's not where we'd like it to be by the end of the drawing, as part of the process and not to fear them. This next point, once we've finished a drawing, once we've finished a practice session, a learning session, we haven't finished. We now need to mark our work. We now need to look at it and say, well, what's worked? What hasn't worked? This obviously includes finding things that don't look right, perspective angles that aren't correct, parts that are out of proportion, but it goes beyond finding things that don't look right. It's also, where are their weaknesses? Where are there possibilities for this drawing to have been done better? Is the problem the original composition? Is my line work too repetitive, too the same, too boring, too cartoon-like? Is visually there some sense of drama or a focus point, or is the whole thing a bit just ordinary? What would I do differently if I were doing it again? And then the obvious question, well, should I do it again? Maybe I need to go back a bit, because generally it's not helpful to move on to higher levels of drawing if I'm not able to do well the lower levels. This next insight is so important because it's the exact opposite probably of what we're going to think. Because if I'm learning to draw, I'm probably very aware that I'm a student needing to learn. And yet the truth is, unless I'm in a class or doing a course that's all been set out from start to finish by someone else, I'm not just the student, I'm also my own teacher. And that means I have to do all the tasks that a teacher would do. I need to work out, what work are we going to do? What's the subject? Where do we want to be at the end of it? I need to work out the time commitment and how it's going to be organised. I need to work out the teaching material that the student is going to use. I'm going to work out what actual drawing they need to do, and I'm going to have to mark their work and decide, is this a pass? Is it a fail? Can they go on to harder work? Do they need to stay at this level? Do they need to go back a level? I have to do all of these things if I'm the teacher as well as the student. It's really important to understand the difference between learning to draw and copying something that someone else has already drawn. Because we end up with the same looking thing at the end, our own drawing, it's easy to think that it's basically the same process. It's actually a very different process. And because of that, copying, when we are learning to draw, can be a very distracting and unhelpful thing. Because we end up with a better result through copying because it's much easier to do than we can get from drawing our own drawing. And this can lead to confusion, to discouragement, to trying to find shortcuts that really aren't there. When I'm drawing my own drawing, when I'm looking at a photo or something in life, I'm having to look at one visual form and translate it into another. If it's a photo, I'm looking at the visual form of the photographic process that's printed with 3 or 4 colors of ink. And I have a black fine liner pen and I have to translate that into what I can put on a white sheet of paper with a black fine liner pen. It's understanding this process that guides me as to what marks I'm going to put on my paper. That will help me choose, if you like, the best words of the new language to say the same thing. And when I copy someone else's work, I don't have to do any of that. They've done that. I'm now just looking at their solutions and copying their solutions, but I haven't learned how to do that translation myself. I haven't learned even that there is a need to find a solution to the problem of translating from one visual image to a totally different language. It's a lot more challenging to work out what marks to put where. But these are the skills we have to learn. Copying doesn't take us there. I think that last point leads on to this next insight, that understanding a process of drawing is going to be far more useful than learning techniques here and there. It's not having the skill to put the mark, the line, the curve, the angle on the paper that's the hard thing. It's knowing what mark to put where, why, how, and how to build them all together. There is no one way in this. It all depends on where we want to end up. But working out how to get where we want to end up will need a consistent process and understanding. It's developing this that takes time and effort, and there's no, sadly, shortcut to. A big thing that beginners often do, which I think really sets back their learning improvement, is to try and do really long drawing sessions and produce large, complex drawings. There's far more learning to be had with short, regular, more frequent sessions because of what I think of as the learning cycle. For drawing, the learning cycle is choosing what we're going to draw, a reference of some sort, drawing it, critiquing it, work out what we would have done differently if we were doing it now with what we now know. That's a learning cycle. That's the activity and time that we actually learn something that can now improve our next drawing cycle. And I can have a learning cycle that takes me 30 minutes, say, or one that takes me 180 minutes. Still only one drawing cycle. I'm going to learn far more if I have 6 30-minute sessions than one 180-minute session. Both because it's more sessions, and secondly because I'm going to be able to have those shorter sessions closer together more frequently. And the closer together we have sessions, the easier it is to remember what we've learned in our last critiquing and to consciously use it in what we're doing then. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Please hit the like button if you've found these helpful. Learning to draw is a great adventure to be on, but if we don't realise what we're starting to do, the journey we're embarking on at the start, we can easily become discouraged or possibly just end up doing things that aren't going to take us to the place we were hoping to get to. Hope these 10 insights will give some sort of framework to help you work out where you want to go with your drawing and to get there. But wherever that is and however you get there or end up somewhere else, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.